Trusted Visions podcast. We apologize, Stacey. We weren't able to do this podcast and wrap up this series last week because I was in a place that had absolutely no cell service and or internet in South Lake Tahoe. So hopefully we are in Yosemite now. We can conclude this series, even though we're already into October, which I can't believe it's October already. This week, we're going to finish up this series talking about the different channels within the broker-dealer space. And this week's topic is probably the most interesting and most talked about in the industry of the RIA space. And there's a lot of glitz and glamour there. And a lot of people think, I can get away from the broker-dealer nickeling and diming, and I can, get away from FINRA. That is true. But there's also some nuances there that a lot of people don't think about. So I'm going to cover the positives, which I just covered some of them, Stacey, about going into the RIA space and getting away from the broker-dealer. Now, you could still have an RIA and be what they call as a hybrid, which you're still part of a broker-dealer, which everybody in our audience should know. But this is particularly being RIA only. And what that means, the positives are, like I mentioned, you get away from FINRA. You're regulated by either the state or the SEC, depending on the asset totals you have. You have much more flexibility in custodians, whether it be Fidelity, Schwab, innovative brokers, or interactive brokers. There's a lot of different options from a custodial standpoint. You don't have the fees as it pertains to the broker-dealer space. Typically, E&O is a lot cheaper. The technology offerings, some of them could be more expensive, but you're going to save money from that perspective. And in addition to that, from a payout perspective, you don't have, I guess you can consider a broker-dealer, Stacey, a middleman or woman. You don't have that middle person that's taking a haircut on your practice. So you're keeping 100% of your fees. You are truly on your own as it pertains to having your own RIA, not having the broker-dealer set of policies and procedures. You have to have your own, but you don't have to abide by the broker-dealer's policies and procedures or FINRA's procedures or policies. You're living and breathing by the state and the SEC. And so there's a lot to unpack there, and we could probably talk for a whole month just on the RIA space. But Stacey, I wouldn't call this side of it the con, so to speak, as we've done in the past. But can you speak to our audience about the challenges that comes with having your own RIA and being RIA only?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And good list of positives there. I think we'll hear more and more advisors that start to think, hey, this is the path to go down. I am going to simplify my life if I can drop the FINRA licenses. I would caution you to just still dig deep and talk to some other offices that have done this. In my years, I've heard it from both ends, right? So I can think of an office out of Ohio that I talked with, and they were still a state registered REA, so not quite SEC level at that point. And the biggest thing that he shared was, I did this so that I could spend more time with my clients, simplify my life on the regulatory front. But what he found was he was spending more and more time on things like picking out the errors and omissions insurance every single year to make sure he got the right rate, the right coverage. He was having to spend more time doing the cybersecurity policies and the requirements as that whole thing evolves in time. That was also about the time that some of the DOL regulations were coming out, and we've had many iterations of that, and we're probably not done yet. That absolutely impacts the REA side as well, and you just don't necessarily have the buffer of that corporate REA with a broker dealer taking charge of that for you. So I think on the positive side, right, as you said, there's some things that you maybe drop if you don't have FINRA licenses involved. However, there's a lot of compliance things that you're still responsible for. And to be fair, you can outsource a lot of those. There's a lot of good companies out there that can take on a lot of the compliance burdens, but it doesn't take away all of them. You still have to be the chief compliance officer of the REA. There's still things that you're ultimately responsible from the regulation, implementation when, the next iteration of DOL comes through, or maybe there's AML requirements. I thought it was really interesting the comments I get even from advisors with broker dealer backing of size, just in that cybersecurity space. Advisors, you want to be really responsible and careful on that data security side for your clients. So just really being careful and making sure you have the coverage there is important. The other thing, Jeremy, I know you've seen and heard this too, but audits have only increased. Whether it's the state or the SEC in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, you've really seen that them come down. Maybe offices that for 20 years they were an REA and were never audited. Now they've got people coming in the door, right? And it's small things. It's like the 401k space. You say you're going to do this for your client in this way, but you didn't do it right. So I'm going to give a billing example. I've seen an office get fined because the way they did their fee billing didn't follow what they said on paper. It was actually to the benefit of the client. The client was charged less, but their RIA was fined because they didn't do what they said they were going to do. So there's just nuances like that that you've really got to dig into. And if you do outsource that compliance, make sure you're thorough. The other thing I'd add is if you're going to go down this RIA route and drop that other buffer, right, as far as a larger RIA taking on some of that work or the broker dealer side, just know that the more flexibility that you try to add to that REA, more choices, more options, the more difficult it is going to be to update those ADVs, more difficult it is to oversee what you're, saying you're going to provide through that REA. So simpler the better. But again, complexity just brings its own challenges. So just I would be aware of those things, really dig into that compliance side, because that's just an area you don't want to get bogged down in if you do it wrong.
Yeah, and I would add there, Stacey, to your point about audits. I mean, I have an advisor that has his own SEC RIA. His audit was 3.5 months long. And so, to our audience, you got to ask yourself, and I'm not saying it's not the right direction, but you have to ask yourself, is the 5% haircut that the broker dealer is taking or 7% really worth, to your point, Stacey, being the chief compliance officer, putting policies and procedures together? And quite honestly, as the custodian options get less and less, you're seeing the likes of a Schwab or a Fidelity. Back in my day when I worked at Schwab, they would take advisors that had 10 million in assets. Now they really want 50, 100, 150 million in assets. So it's not as easy as it once was to negotiate, a custodial arrangement when you go that path. So again, we went into October, wrapping up this month. We will start a new topic next week. Stacey, as always, your contact information.
My number is 641-919-6722. And you can email me at stacy.martin@trustedvisions.com.
And for me, you can call or text 480-430-5012 or info@trustedvisions.com. Hope everybody has a great week.